Think owning a sailboat is your ticket to freedom. These 5 dream boats could sink your bank account faster than a storm. Picture this. You're scrolling through boat listings, dreaming of sunset sails and tropical anchorages when you spot that perfect sailboat. The price seems too good to be true. The photos show gleaming fiberglass and billowing sails, and suddenly you're imagining yourself as the next sailing YouTube star. But here's what those glossy photos don't show you. The rust eating through the rigging, the soft spots in the deck that'll cost you a fortune, and the previous owner's desperate smile as they hand over the keys, knowing they're about to become your problem. These boats made history, but their stories are a warning for beginners. From the Caribbean charter boats that launched 1,000 dreams to the blue water cruises that crossed oceans with celebrities, these vessels have epic tales to tell. But for every success story, there's a heartbroken owner who learned the hard way that some dreams come with a price tag that never stops growing. The allure of sailing is undeniable. There's something magical about the idea of harnessing the wind to carry you across endless blue waters, of dropping anchor in secluded coves where the only sounds are lapping waves and seabirds. It's freedom in its purest form. No schedules, no traffic jams, just you, your boat, and the horizon. Social media has only amplified this romance, with countless YouTube channels showing sun-bronzed sailors living their best lives, cocktails in hand as dolphins play in their wake. The sailing dream has never been more seductive, and it's never been easier to convince yourself that you're just one boat purchase away from joining their ranks. But here's the problem that no one talks about in those Instagram posts. Many beginners buy these so-called dream sailboats without understanding the hidden costs that can turn paradise into a financial nightmare. They see the purchase price and think that's the end of their investment, not realizing they've just bought a ticket to an exclusive club where the membership dues never stop coming. These aren't just boats, they're floating money pits disguised as dreams. I'm about to reveal 5 iconic sailboats, their epic histories, and real stories of owners who learned the hard way that sometimes the most beautiful dreams can become the most expensive nightmares. Plus, I'll share the tips that could have saved them thousands of dollars and years of heartache. These aren't just cautionary tales, they're survival guides for anyone who's ever looked at a sailboat and felt their heart skip a beat. Let's start with the Morgan Out Island 41, a boat that's written its name across sailing history in both triumph and tears. Back in the 1970s, when bell-bottom jeans were fashionable and disco ruled the airwaves, a brilliant naval architect named Charlie Morgan was revolutionizing the sailing world. The Out Island 41 wasn't just a boat, it was a game changer that single-handedly created the modern charter industry. With its spacious design and shallow draft, it was perfect for Caribbean cruising, where tourists could live out their sailing fantasies without needing deep-water expertise. The boat became a sensation, featured on the covers of sailing magazines and marketed as the ultimate floating condo. Charter companies couldn't get enough of them, and soon the Caribbean was filled with these distinctive vessels, their white hulls gleaming against turquoise waters. The Morgan Out Island 41 represented everything the 1970s sailing boom promised: affordable luxury, easy handling, and the kind of space that made long-term cruising not just possible, but comfortable. This is exactly why modern beginners fall head over heels for used Morgan Out Island 41s. You can find them today for what seems like a steal, often between $30,000 and $50,000. And when you step aboard, it's easy to see why they were called floating condos. The interior is genuinely spacious, with room to actually live aboard rather than just survive. The shallow draft means you can explore places that deeper boats can't reach, and there's something undeniably romantic about owning a piece of sailing history. But here's where the dream starts turning into a nightmare, and it begins with something called osmotic blistering. The fiberglass hulls on these older Morgans are prone to a condition where water molecules actually penetrate the hull material, creating bubbles and blisters that can spread like a disease. It doesn't look dramatic at first, maybe just a few small bumps you might dismiss as cosmetic. But fixing osmotic blistering properly requires stripping the entire bottom of the boat down to the bare fiberglass, treating it and rebuilding the barrier coat. We're talking about $10,000 to $20,000 in repair costs, and that's assuming you catch it before it gets really bad. Then there are the systems. These boats are now 40 to 50 years old, which means every wire, every pipe, every through-hull fitting is approaching the end of its design life. The plumbing systems that seemed so luxurious in 1975 are now corroded disasters waiting to flood your boat. The electrical systems that powered those convenient amenities are now fire hazards with brittle insulation and corroded connections. A complete overhaul of these systems can easily cost another $5,000 to $15,000. And that's if you're lucky enough to find problems before they become emergencies. But wait, it gets worse. Remember how I mentioned these boats were designed for the charter trade? That means they were built for capacity and comfort, not sailing performance. The Morganhout Island 41 is heavy, really heavy, and its rigging is often underpowered for its size. In light winds, it's like trying to sail a brick, and in heavy weather, the inadequate rigging can fail catastrophically. New sails can cost $3,000 to $5,000, and if you need to upgrade the rigging to actually make the boat sail properly, you're looking at even more money. Let me tell you about John and Sarah, a couple who thought they'd found their dream boat in 2022. They'd been watching sailing videos for years, imagining themselves cruising the Bahamas. And when they found a 1978 Morganhout Island 41 listed for $40,000, it seemed like fate. The pictures showed a clean interior, and the seller assured them it was ready to go. They were so excited about the spacious cabin and the shallow draft that would let them explore the Bahamas that they barely looked at the hull. 6 months later, they were heartbroken and nearly broke. A routine survey had revealed extensive osmotic blistering that would cost $15,000 to repair properly. When they started updating the boat's systems, they discovered that the electrical panel was a fire waiting to happen, and the plumbing had been maintained with so much creative plumbing that it resembled a pasta factory more than a boat. $8,000 later, they had rigging that actually worked, but they'd already spent more than $23,000 on top of their purchase price. They sold the boat at a significant loss, their dreams of Bahamian sunsets replaced by credit card bills. The tragic irony is that the Morganhout Island 41 fueled the entire 1970s charter boom, creating the template for affordable sailing vacations that millions of people still enjoy today. But those charter boats were maintained by professional crews and replaced regularly. The ones available to beginners today are the survivors, boats that have been patched, modified, and improved by decades of well-meaning owners who often created more problems than they solved. Now let's talk about the Hunter 37 Cherubini, a boat with some of the most elegant lines ever drawn and some of the most expensive surprises ever hidden. Designed by John Cherubini in the late 1970s, this boat was the poster child for affordable elegance. When it appeared in harbors from California to Maine, other sailors would stop and stare. It had that perfect balance of classic proportions and modern convenience that made it irresistible to anyone who loved traditional yacht design. The Hunter 37 Cherubini became a staple of the late 70s cruising scene, representing everything that was romantic about sailing. It appeared in countless sailing magazines, and decades later, it gained new fame when popular sailing vloggers featured it in their adventures. There's something about its sleek lines and traditional proportions that makes it look fast even when it's sitting still, and the classic styling means it never really goes out of fashion. This is exactly why beginners fall in love with the Hunter 37 Cherubini. You can find them today for $20,000 to $40,000, and when you see one, it's love at first sight. The boat looks like it stepped out of a 1970s sailing magazine, with graceful overhangs and a profile that screams serious yacht rather than fiberglass production boat. For history buffs and anyone who appreciates classic design, it represents everything sailing should look like. But beneath that gorgeous exterior lurk some truly expensive surprises, starting with the deck. The Hunter 37 Cherubini was built with a balsa core deck, which was considered high-tech engineering in the 1970s. Balsa core makes decks lighter and stiffer than solid fiberglass, but it has one fatal flaw. If water gets into the core material, the balsa wood rots, turning into something with the structural integrity of wet cardboard. And after 40+ years, water intrusion isn't a possibility, it's almost inevitable. The symptoms start small, maybe a soft spot near a deck fitting or a slight depression that feels squishy underfoot. But by the time you can feel it, the rot has usually spread far beyond what's visible. Properly repairing a rotted deck core means cutting out large sections of the deck, removing all the contaminated balsa, and rebuilding with new core material and fiberglass. We're talking about $10,000 to $20,000 in repair costs, and that's assuming you catch it before it affects the structural integrity of the entire deck. Then there are the systems, and this is where the Hunter 37's age really shows. The original electrical systems were designed in an era when boats had a few lights and maybe a radio. Modern sailors expect refrigeration, navigation electronics, communications equipment, and charging systems for all their devices. Retrofitting a 40-year-old electrical system to handle modern loads safely can cost $5,000 to $10,000, and that's if the boat's wiring is still in decent condition. The original engines in these boats are also reaching the end of their practical lives. A diesel engine can last decades with proper maintenance, but most 40-year-old boat engines have been maintained by a succession of owners with varying levels of mechanical skill. By the time you buy the boat, you might be looking at a complete engine replacement, which can cost $15,000 or more when you factor in all the associated systems and labor. Let me tell you about Mike, a retiree who fell in love with a 1980 Hunter 37 Cherubini in 2021. He'd spent his career as an accountant, carefully saving for retirement, and when he saw this boat, it represented everything he'd dreamed about. The classic lines, the rich teak interior, the way it looked like a yacht rather than just a boat. It was perfect. He paid $30,000 for what he thought was his ticket to the cruising lifestyle he'd been planning for years. The problem started almost immediately. During his first weekend aboard, he noticed that the deck felt a little soft around the mast, but the seller had assured him it was just normal flexing. Within a month, that soft spot had grown, and a surveyor confirmed his worst fears, extensive deck core rot that would require major reconstruction. $12,000 later, he had a solid deck again, but his savings were already taking a serious hit. Then came the electrical issues. The boat's original wiring was a maze of modifications and patches, and when he tried to install a modern chart plotter, the system couldn't handle the load. $7,000 later, he had a completely rewired boat, but he was starting to realize that his affordable dream boat was turning into an expensive nightmare. When the engine started making ominous noises during his first real cruise, he knew he was in trouble. The engine replacement cost another $15,000, bringing his total investment to $64,000 for a boat he'd bought for $30,000. Mike now spends his time on sailing forums, warning other retirees about the hidden costs of affordable classic boats. He still loves his Hunter 37, but he's honest about what it cost him to make it truly seaworthy. The boat that was supposed to fund his retirement dreams instead consumed a significant portion of his savings. The Hunter 37 Cherubini represents a perfect storm of factors that make it a beginner's nightmare. Hunter's mass production approach made sailing more accessible by bringing costs down, but it also meant cutting corners in ways that wouldn't become apparent for decades. The boats were built to a price point, not to a standard, and that difference becomes expensive when systems start failing 40 years later. Now let's discuss the Amel Super Maramu, a boat that represents the absolute pinnacle of French yacht building and the absolute depths of maintenance expenses. Built in La Rochelle, France, from 1988 to 2005, The Super Maramu was designed for serious blue water cruising by people who understood that the ocean doesn't care about your budget. These boats were built like tanks, with aluminum hulls, redundant systems, and attention to detail that makes modern production boats look like toys. The Super Maramu gained legendary status in the cruising community, and for good reason. These boats have sailed everywhere, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, and their owners have a cultish devotion that borders on religious. When the crew of sailing SV Delos chose a Super Maramu for their world circumnavigation, logging over 70,000 nautical miles, it cemented the boat's reputation as the ultimate blue water cruiser. There's something undeniably impressive about a boat that can handle anything the ocean can throw at it. This reputation is exactly why beginners with bigger budgets are drawn to used Super Maramus. At $150,000 to $250,000, they're not cheap, but they represent what seems like a reasonable entry point into serious offshore cruising. The aluminum construction means no osmotic blistering. The systems are designed for self-sufficiency, and there's a certain cachet that comes with owning a boat that's completed multiple circumnavigations. But here's what those YouTube videos don't tell you about Super Maramu ownership. These boats are incredibly complex, and complexity equals expense. Every system is built to marine standards, which means everything costs more than you expect. The electric winches that make single-handed sailing possible are also prone to failure, and rebuilding them can cost thousands of dollars each. The water maker that provides fresh water independence can fail catastrophically, and replacement costs start at $10,000. The sophisticated autopilot systems that keep the boat on course while you sleep are also prone to expensive failures that can cost $5,000 or more to repair. Then there's the ketch rig, which looks beautiful and provides great sail balance, but also means you have twice as many sails, twice as much rigging, and twice as many things that can go wrong. Replacing the sails on a Super Maramu can cost $20,000 to $30,000, and the complex rigging systems require specialized knowledge that most yard workers don't possess. Finding someone who really understands these boats can be challenging, and when you do find them, their expertise comes at a premium price. The annual maintenance costs on a Super Maramu can easily reach $10,000, even when nothing major breaks, and major repairs can cost as much as a small house. The sophisticated systems that make these boats so capable also make them expensive to maintain, and the French engineering philosophy of building to last means that when something does break, it's usually a significant component that requires significant money to fix properly. Let me tell you about Lisa, a successful entrepreneur who sold her business in 2020 with dreams of world cruising. She'd watched every sailing YouTube channel, read every cruising blog, and was convinced that she wanted to do it right the first time. When she found a 1995 Super Maramu for $200,000, it seemed like the perfect boat, proven, capable, and ready for serious cruising. The first year was magical. The boat sailed beautifully, the systems worked flawlessly, and Lisa felt like she'd made the right choice. She spent months in the Caribbean, learning the boat systems and planning her eventual Pacific crossing. But during her second season, things started going wrong in expensive ways. The water maker, which had provided unlimited fresh water, suffered a catastrophic failure that contaminated the entire freshwater system. Cleaning and replacing the system cost $18,000. Then, the electric winch system, which had made single-handed sailing so easy, started failing intermittently. Rebuilding both primary winches cost $12,000, and that was just the beginning. When Lisa finally attempted her first major passage, the autopilot system failed halfway to Bermuda, forcing her to hand steer for 36 hours until she could reach port. The replacement autopilot computer and associated repairs cost another $15,000. By the end of her second year of ownership, she'd spent over $50,000 on repairs and maintenance, turning her $200,000 dreamboat into a $250,000 reality check. Lisa still owns her Super Maramu and still loves it, but she's honest about the costs. She now budgets $25,000 per year for maintenance and repairs, treating boat ownership more like maintaining a small yacht than owning a recreational vehicle. For someone with her resources, it's manageable, but for a beginner who thought $200,000 would buy them into worry-free world cruising, the reality can be crushing. The Super Maramu represents the pinnacle of 1990s blue water cruising technology, and that's exactly the problem. These boats were designed when systems were complex but computers were simple, when redundancy meant having two of everything rather than having everything connected to everything else. Modern boats are actually simpler in many ways, even though they seem more complex, because they're designed for owner maintenance rather than professional crews. Let's move on to the Beneteau First 38, a boat that promises racing performance at cruising boat prices and delivers exactly that, along with all the expensive consequences that come with high-performance sailing. Built from 1978 to 1985, the First 38 was Beneteau's answer to the growing demand for boats that could win races on weekends and cruise comfortably during vacations. With its sleek lines and promising speed, it represented the perfect marriage of performance and practicality. The First 38 quickly became a fixture in racing circles around the world, appearing in everything from local beer can races to serious offshore events. Its combination of speed and affordability made it accessible to amateur racers who couldn't afford custom racing yachts, and its decent accommodations meant it could double as a cruising boat when racing season ended. Popular sailing vloggers like those from Sailing Doodles have featured these boats, praising their sailing performance and classic French design. For beginners who want more than just transportation, the First 38 seems like the perfect solution. At $30,000 to $50,000, it's affordable enough for most budgets, and the promise of real sailing performance is seductive. There's something intoxicating about the idea of owning a boat that can actually win races, that can show its stern to more expensive boats when the wind picks up, that turns heads in every harbor. But racing boats are built for speed, not longevity, and that philosophy creates expensive problems decades later. The hull construction that makes the First 38 fast also makes it vulnerable to structural issues that can be catastrophically expensive to repair. The hull-to-deck joint, which is the seam where the hull and deck are bonded together, is a common failure point that can cost $10,000 to $20,000 to repair properly. When racing loads stress this joint repeatedly over decades, cracks can develop that compromise the boat's structural integrity. Then there are the keel bolts, the massive bolts that hold the heavy lead keel to the boat. In racing boats, these bolts are stressed to their limits every time the boat heels hard in strong winds, and after 40 years of racing loads, they can fail without warning. A keel falling off is every sailor's worst nightmare, and preventing it requires regular inspection and eventual replacement of the keel bolts, a job that can cost $15,000 or more. The racing-oriented systems also create ongoing expense that cruising boat owners don't face. Racing sails are cut for performance, not durability, and they need frequent replacement to maintain their shape and speed. A new set of racing sails can cost $7,000 or more, and serious racers replace them every few years. The complex rigging systems that allow fine-tuning of sail shape are also prone to failure and expensive to replace. Let me tell you about Tom, a young software engineer who fell in love with the idea of racing sailboats. He'd grown up watching America's Cup coverage and dreamed of feeling that kind of speed and excitement on his own boat. When he found a 1982 Beneteau First 38 for $35,000 in 2021, it seemed like his chance to live that dream affordably. The first season was everything he'd hoped for. The boat was genuinely fast, easily outpacing other boats in his size class, and Tom quickly became addicted to the thrill of competitive sailing. He joined a local racing circuit and started winning races, feeling like he'd found his calling as a sailor. But racing is hard on boats, and Tom learned this lesson the expensive way. During a particularly competitive race in heavy winds, he heard a sickening crack from below. The boat had run aground briefly while tacking, and the impact had cracked the keel bolts. What started as a minor grounding turned into an $18,000 repair job that required hauling the boat and completely rebuilding the keel attachment. While the boat was in the yard, Tom discovered other expensive surprises. The hull-to-deck joint showed signs of movement, requiring additional reinforcement that cost another $7,000. The racing sails, which had looked fine when he bought the boat, were actually at the end of their useful life, and replacing them with proper racing sails cost $5,000. By the end of his second season, Tom had spent more than $30,000 on repairs and improvements, nearly doubling his initial investment. The boat that was supposed to give him affordable access to racing had instead given him expensive access to debt. He eventually sold the boat and bought a more practical cruising boat, but he still winces when he calculates how much his racing dreams actually cost. Tom's story illustrates the fundamental problem with buying old racing boats as affordable alternatives to new ones. Racing boats are designed with performance as the primary goal, and everything else, including durability and ease of maintenance, is secondary. What seems like a bargain purchase price becomes expensive when you factor in the ongoing costs of maintaining a boat that was designed to be fast, not cheap to own. The Beneteau First 38 represents the democratization of racing sailboats that occurred in the 1980s, when production builders started offering high-performance designs at relatively affordable prices. But this democratization came with compromises that become expensive decades later, and beginners who are drawn to the performance often aren't prepared for the associated costs. Finally, let's discuss the Tartan 37, a boat that represents everything elegant about American yacht design and everything expensive about maintaining that elegance. Designed by the legendary naval architecture firm Sparkman and Stevens and built from 1976 to 1989, the Tartan 37 was the yacht that serious sailors aspired to own. With its classic lines, impeccable construction, and association with some of the most successful racing and cruising yachts ever built, the Tartan 37 was considered the pinnacle of mid-sized yacht design. These boats were fixtures in the yacht clubs of the Northeast, representing old money elegance and serious sailing credentials. Sparkman and Stevens had designed everything from America's Cup winners to ocean-crossing legends, and their reputation for creating boats that were both beautiful and seaworthy was unmatched. The Tartan 37 carried that pedigree in every line, from its perfectly proportioned profile to its carefully detailed interior. For history enthusiasts and anyone who appreciates classic yacht design, the Tartan 37 represents everything a proper yacht should be. Available today for $40,000 to $60,000, these boats offer genuine elegance at what seems like a reasonable price. The Sparkman and Stevens design pedigree, the solid construction that Tartan was famous for, and the timeless beauty of the boats make them irresistible to buyers who want something special. But that elegance comes with a price tag that extends far beyond the purchase price, starting with the signature feature that makes these boats so beautiful, the teak decks. Real teak decks were the mark of a serious yacht in the 1980s, and they look absolutely gorgeous when properly maintained. The warm honey color of fresh teak, the perfect corked seams, the way water beads and runs off, it's yachting perfection. But teak decks are also maintenance nightmares that can consume enormous amounts of time and money. Over decades, the corking between the teak planks fails, allowing water to penetrate into the deck structure below. Once water gets into the deck core, it starts a slow-motion disaster that can cost $15,000 to $25,000 to repair properly. The only real solution is to remove the entire teak deck, repair any structural damage underneath, and either replace the teak or cover the deck with a modern non-skid surface. The traditional systems that give these boats their classic character are also expensive to maintain properly. The mechanical systems, things like manual winches, traditional blocks and hardware, and classic-style rigging, may look beautiful, but they require regular maintenance and eventual replacement with parts that cost significantly more than modern alternatives. The standing rigging that holds up the mast needs replacement every 10 to 15 years, and on a Tartan 37, that can cost $5,000 to $10,000 for proper stainless steel rigging. Then there's the engine, and this is where the Tartan 37's age really shows. These boats are now 35 to 45 years old, which means their original engines are well past their design life. A proper diesel engine replacement, including all the associated systems and professional installation, can cost $15,000 or more. Modern engines are more reliable and efficient than their 1980s predecessors, but they're also more expensive and often require modifications to fit into older engine spaces. Let me tell you about Emma, a maritime history professor who fell in love with a 1980 Tartan 37 in 2022. As someone who studied sailing history, she understood the significance of owning a Sparkman and Stevens design, and the boat's classic proportions and traditional details spoke to everything she loved about sailing's golden age. She paid $50,000 for what she considered a piece of sailing history. For the first few months, Emma felt like she'd made the perfect choice. The boat sailed beautifully, drawing admiring glances in every harbor, and she loved the way the teak decks felt under her bare feet. But during her first winter, she started noticing soft spots in the deck around some of the hardware, and by spring, it was clear that water had been penetrating the teak for years. The repair estimate was devastating: $22,000 to remove the teak decks, repair the underlying structure, and install a modern deck surface. Emma loved the traditional teak, but she couldn't afford to replace it properly, so she opted for the modern alternative. While the boat was in the yard, the surveyor discovered that the engine was on its last legs, requiring another $15,000 for replacement. By the time Emma got her boat back, she'd spent $87,000 for a boat she'd bought for $50,000. She still loves her Tartan 37 and appreciates its classic design, but she's honest about what it cost to make it properly seaworthy. The boat that was supposed to connect her with sailing history instead connected her with the expensive reality of maintaining that history. Emma's story illustrates the central challenge of buying classic boats. They represent the best of their era, but that era's standards for construction and systems are often incompatible with modern expectations for reliability and cost-effectiveness. What was considered normal maintenance in the 1980s becomes prohibitively expensive when performed with modern labor rates and materials costs. The Tartan 37 represents the peak of 1980s American yacht building, when boats were built to standards that assumed unlimited maintenance budgets and professional crews. These boats were designed for yacht club members who could afford whatever maintenance was required, not for budget-conscious beginners trying to enter sailing affordably. So what can you do to avoid becoming another cautionary tale? The most important step is getting a professional marine survey before you buy any boat, especially an older one. A good surveyor will cost you $500 to $1,000, but they can save you tens of thousands by identifying problems before you become responsible for them. Don't skip the survey to save money. It's the cheapest insurance you'll ever buy. Start small and simple, especially if you're new to sailing. A smaller boat like a Catalina 27 will teach you everything you need to know about sailing and boat ownership without the financial risks of a larger, more complex vessel. You can always upgrade later, but you can't undo the financial damage of buying too much boat too soon. Budget for maintenance costs that equal 10 to 20% of your boat's value every year. This isn't optional. Boats require constant maintenance to remain safe and functional, and older boats require even more. If you can't afford the ongoing costs, you can't afford the boat, regardless of how attractive the purchase price seems. Research the specific problems associated with any boat you're considering. Every model has known issues, and understanding them before you buy can help you negotiate price or decide to walk away. Online forums like Cruisers Forum and communities like the Sailing subreddit on Reddit are invaluable resources for learning about real-world ownership experiences. The sailing dream is real, and it's absolutely achievable, but it requires honest preparation and realistic expectations. These 5 boats aren't inherently bad. They're actually quite good at what they were designed to do. The problem is that what they were designed to do often doesn't match what modern beginner sailors need or can afford to maintain. Your sailing dreams don't have to become financial nightmares, but they do require careful planning, honest budgeting, and realistic expectations. The ocean is waiting, and the right boat is out there. You just need to make sure it's truly right for your skills, your budget, and your dreams. Don't let the romance of sailing blind you to the realities of boat ownership, because the most expensive boat you can buy is the wrong boat, regardless of what you paid for it. Have you ever dreamed of owning a sailboat? Tell us in the comments what draws you to sailing and whether these stories have changed your perspective on boat ownership. And if you want to learn more about the greatest sailing adventures in history, the ones where proper preparation met opportunity to create legendary voyages, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Next week, we're diving into the incredible story of the boats and sailors who turned dreams into reality by doing their homework first.